So good evening and welcome. My name is Laura DeVoe. I'm on the advisory board for Build the Era. For those of you who are new, please introduce yourselves in the chat. If you are somebody who is not new, go ahead and say hi again in the chat. Okay, we are a chatty, happy kind of group. And so if you are here for the first time to a Build the Era event, welcome. Build the Era is an education and advocacy organization focused on transportation and infrastructure as it relates to the Department of Transportation, or the DOT. We are volunteer founded, volunteer powered, and volunteer staffed, predominantly from Pete Buttigieg's 2020 presidential campaign volunteers. We also have some folks who have come to us from the Biden support team and all that sort of thing after kind of getting a load of Pete and getting really excited about his leadership. Build the Era's purpose is to connect citizens across America to the Department of Transportation by through education and information as to what the public, educating and informing the public as to what the Department of Transportation does and does not do and why this matters. We are here to educate and inform the public to the role that infrastructure plays in America's quality of life. Provide training and guidance on how to engage with local and federal elected officials on matters related to Department of Transportation initiatives, which is going to be very important, effective now. Provide training and guidance on how to advocate for causes using our skills in relational organizing as a primary tool. And finally, creating measurable and effective change as it relates to Department of Transportation issues. And so we have been holding events since our founding back in the spring. If you go to buildtheera.com, you will see on our website, there is a variety of resources, including a YouTube page. Our YouTube channel has all kinds of events, unlike the campaign, where we really didn't record our events because we didn't want other candidates to know what was going on. Everything we do here in Build the Era is recorded and provided on our website and on our YouTube page so that you can go back and get the most out of your membership. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward. One of the other things that I think is really interesting and important to know about Build the Era is we have volunteers in our organization who are experts in transportation. I like to say I am a front-end user. I am a person who travels by car, by bike, by foot, by mass transit. I am a front-end user. I am the person sitting behind the wheel of my car going, who times these lights? Why am I sitting here like this? I am a person who looks at our transportation infrastructure and goes, why is the MBTA so slow? And why isn't there east-west rail here in Massachusetts to take me from Boston to Springfield? Jonathan French and Jeannie Akutanza are people who know why all of these things happen. They understand it. They may not like it, but they get it. Okay. And so we are really, really fortunate to have them here. And they are our resident experts. Jonathan and Jeannie have hosted a variety of events for us. They have also, Jeannie and Jonathan have written blog posts, and Jeannie has a podcast that is also available through our website. It is a wealth of information. And so I advise you and encourage you to check it out. The last thing I wanted to say is there was a couple people here who are part of the team that I want to give a shout out to, and then I will ask Jeannie to share her screen. Christina Cronin, as well as Jan, who is not here tonight because Jan is on vacation, God love her. They run our Twitter account. Bill is here. He does Facebook and other accounts. And he also is kind of the juggernaut behind our regular communication, along with Sarah Carroll and Ali Mishki. And so if you are somebody who is getting our emails every week, they are the prettiest, the most informative, and the most lovely emails, okay? And it's because of Ali, Sarah, and Bill. And so we respect your inbox. We're not going to spam it. And so you will, if you get more than one email a week, it's because of some big damn thing. Okay. And so that is the reality. Another person who is just getting on right now is Julie. Julie runs our website. And if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be able to do 2/3 of the stuff we do. So thank you to Julie. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm going to turn things over to Jeannie and to Jonathan, and then I will be back in my Oprah Winfrey mode to ask some questions. Please use the chat. Bill and I will be monitoring the chat, but please use the chat for good, not evil, and we will open it up for questions soon. So Jeannie and Jonathan, take over, and I will be back with some questions in a minute.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say is you can go to our YouTube channel, and we have covered a number of these topics, especially about the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, like what's in it. So you can go back to that and we'll share that. Thank you very much for allowing us to chat. I love meeting Jonathan. It was this is, as is everything in Pete world, you meet the greatest people and like friends for life. So what just happened? This group of Bill Diera was eating popcorn on our couches, watching this bill and the count and listening to all the speeches, and it was the culmination of so much hard work. So I'll look back at today we'll look back at why infrastructure matters, what's in this bill, and then a little bit about what can we do. So Jonathan, any thoughts on as we were counting votes?
Yeah, there was a lot of, the kind of the sausage making is what you saw. You heard a lot about it in the press, and then, that day of the vote, it was like, are they going to have enough? Are they going to have enough? And you kept hearing, kind of on Twitter, you following it, kind of the back and forth about, did they have enough votes? And, at the end of the day, you had 6 Democrats that decided not to vote for it, but you had 13 Republicans that signed on. So it truly was a bipartisan effort. And, a relief, I think, because this has went through 2 false starts, essentially. 2 times we thought this was going to be voted on. The first time it actually wound up having to furlough DOT employees temporarily because their funding was tied to this bill. And then, the second time they passed a continuing resolution to keep, to basically keep those folks from that situation. But the third time's the charm, and and the bill passed, and what a historic bill it is, and we'll get into that here as we go through the slides.
And yeah, just keep in mind that this is a 5-year bill, so we won't have to do this every year. But the other thing is, we listen to everything both sides said here, and I think we want to remember that 200 Republicans and 6 Democrats voted against ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings. They voted against this, and I'm not sure, exactly why. So,
and lead pipes. Voting against removing lead from drinking water is what people voted against. It's really mind-boggling. Yeah,
and so just a little historical perspective. This is what this looks like in the past, going back to 1991. Look at some of these bills, and you start to see what the dollars are. In safety loops, $244 billion. and you can see how it's changed. But really, I wanted to point out how bipartisan this vote was as compared to the bread and butter, the milk and honey that this typically is. 472 votes in the House to 47, 79 to 8, 88 to 5, 91 to 4, 74 to 19. This is very rare, that we are seeing something like 69 to 31. That's not a landslide. That's really unfortunate. 228 to 206, that's very close for something that is motherhood and apple pie.
Yeah, and just you look at it too, you can see the underinvestment that we had. You look at back at 2005, 244 billion, and then you see in 2012, 105. The FAST Act was 305, and then you have this massive infrastructure bill. We should have been doing this all along, but now we're finally headed in the right direction. At least we could spend a whole lot more. We've got the big thing to know is that we've got a whole lot more work than just 1.2 trillion in this country to do. But this at least gets us on the right path and moves us, in the right direction and funds a lot of good things.
It's a substantial pivot point, and it isn't too much. We didn't bite off too much. That's what we're hearing now. Is maybe we bit off too much, and we won't be able to control it, or there won't be enough controls but 1.2 trillion is going to be well needed, and it is secure funding for 5 years, which is, gives everybody a sigh of relief. So why it matters, we can't keep falling behind without starting to address climate change. It gets more expensive, and infrastructure can create and sustain family wage jobs for the 2/3 of Americans that don't have a college degree. Infrastructure can also help with some societal ills, traffic deaths, social justice, equity, restorative justice. We'll talk about the J40 initiative, and then quality of life. So I just think we can't do much better than that. And then this is something we've talked about before. Infrastructure can't keep falling behind. The American Society of Civil Engineers rates our infrastructure, which includes pipes and broadband and schools and all kinds of things, and in addition to roads and bridges and airports and rail. A consistent source of funding is desired by these state DOTs just so they can keep the lights on and keep moving. That Eisenhower Interstate and the railroad system that we built 60 plus years ago, in a state of disrepair. It really needs to be kept up. And then, as Pete would say, that mundane work of maintenance comes with this. And then we've got to keep, improving these grades. We keep talking about being 13th in the nation, in the world, as far as infrastructure. Jonathan, any thoughts, Jonathan?
Yeah, this report card kind of, it's kind of hovered around the same thing for, we've kind of been in the same mark, although roads and bridges have definitely, bridges have improved slightly, but roads have gotten, have stayed the same and then have dipped down a little bit lately. So, there's just, like I said, you can see, a C-, there's a ton of work here to be done. So this bill is very timely and, in past time, really, to get some of this stuff done, accomplished.
Our bridge grade went from a D, it improved slightly, but think about that. A bridge is very unforgiving if it fails. So, our infrastructure is in deep disrepair.
And really, a lot of that was due to the bridge collapse in Minneapolis that really started putting all the funding toward bridges to try to get that back up, because, you do have what's called a lot of fracture critical bridges out there where just one particular part of the bridge can go and the whole thing can collapse. So, multiple inspections, more money toward, repairing bridges, but we're still not where we need to be at all.
And they're not cheap. And especially to repair them. I think, we'll see new technologies to improve bridges, but you're also hearing a lot about complaints about why are we putting any money toward anything where a car goes. But on these roads and highways, it's the main arteries for thousands, the thousands of bus companies that use them, the trucks and all your consumer goods, all that supply chain, and bike lanes use these same roadways. So it's not just cars, but these surface transportation facilities are really important. So Jonathan's going to tell us about the why infrastructure, the value of infrastructure, and why we need additional funding.
Sure. So as you can see kind of from this graph, really, mainly when you've seen these surface transportation bills pass, it's been planned to have these funded out of the Highway Trust Fund. And what that's funded by is the federal gas tax, which is around, it was 18 cents, I think now.
18.
Yeah. So you've got this federal gas tax, and it hasn't been changed since 1993. So, you've got decades here of, underinvestment, and you don't have a mechanism that's been keeping up with inflation, essentially, your labor costs, your rising material costs. And you can see from this graph here, the purchasing power has just kept declining to the point where the Federal Highway Trust Fund has had to be bailed out numerous times from the general fund. And it is actually bailed out in this bill once again. But there's some things in this bill that could potentially look at future funding. And here's your projected, if we didn't pass, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, this is what the graph would have looked like here. When the FAST Act expired, you'd see basically the Highway Trust Fund start to dip into the red more and more by year. What that would mean is essentially Federal Highway Administration would have to stop reimbursing states. And that would mean a lot of work would just shut down all across the country. So, this funding is so critical to keep these projects moving. But unfortunately, the funding mechanism is a big issue, and it still is a big issue. And that's something this bill doesn't quite solve. But it at least provides a little bit of a roadmap and some things to try out for the future.
Yeah, and then the cost of failure. It's not just the cost of failure of that bridge between in Tennessee that's starting to structurally fail, but the closure of that bridge impacts businesses, even temporary delays. Cost failures, commerce, and livelihood. And infrastructure is the engine that this country runs on. So, and additionally, climate resilience. So it's not just air quality, and as we've been talking about, it's been really refreshing in this new administration to not see people questioning climate as much as they were. No snowballs on Congress floor, no the voodoo science, but a real understanding of climate issues and what that means. And I think a lot of states are seeing the impacts to their own infrastructure, in flooding and wildfires, and they know that it's a real threat. So today,
I think the president said $90 billion last year.
Yeah,
climate in damages.
In damages and lives and lost productivity. So what is the main factor in it in total greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector? In 2018, the total was transportation was one of the biggest contributors. And some of these other, we call stationary sources, electricity and industry, there's ways of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation was really always this very difficult thing. We in Puget Sound, some other places, have clean renewable energy through dams and wind and solar. And the more we can do that and charge up transportation with electricity, the more this pie gets much, much smaller and to where we need it. So here's a little image of what the rising cost of these climate disasters is. And you can see in the 80s, not that long ago, but in the 80s, it was 29 disasters and 2,800 deaths. That's more than doubled in these last couple decades. And we're up to 6,000 deaths in the last decade, 119 disasters, $810 billion. And when you put that on record, just last year in 2020, so the start of this next decade, 262 deaths, 95 billion, 22 disasters. And then Hurricane Ida, 50 billion in damages, 80 deaths, and that was early on. That probably doesn't include the full count. So Pete said, as eloquently as he has, every dollar spent on rebuilding this infrastructure is a dollar we could have spent building that more competitive, modern, and resilient transportation system that produces significantly fewer emissions. So we're just treading water right now. So if we can't turn this around, we're in deep trouble. Infrastructure means jobs, and it's not just the 1.5 to 2 million jobs per year, but it's when you build that light rail extension connects to new communities, and those new communities spur opportunity and building, and opportunities for jobs and new restaurants and new businesses. And then that expanding transit is equal to those jobs. These jobs are trade jobs, union jobs, made in the United States. All of those bus replacements, those buses are going to be made in the United States. So Jonathan and I did a discussion about jobs as well. I'll tell you about the union side. And then equity. Go ahead.
I was going to ask real quick on that buses. Didn't I read that part of this is the bill will replace every yellow school bus in America with clean electric buses? Do I have that right?
It's they're in 20% chunks over the 5 years, and I think it's low and no emission, low emission and no emission, so hybrid buses. But all of those buses would be made here. And when you think about that, but those school buses are very expensive, and they're built and designed to such safety standards because they carry kids. So those buses are pretty hefty investments, and all those buses would be made in the United States.
Great, thank you.
So equity and justice, resilience and beauty. Other things in the bill, it does. When Biden first day in office, he put in place this executive order titled Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government. It's the first executive order he signed. It advances racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. So you will find this in everything in this administration. It will, and in just this transportation investment or infrastructure, it strengthens ADA, puts real serious money into it. There will be opportunities for small, veteran, disadvantaged business enterprises. The RAISE grant that I talked about, it's rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and equity. It's the first grant call that they made. They're able to now, with this infrastructure bill, it was originally $1 billion. It is now $1.5 billion, and it will be $1.5 billion for 5 years. There is an emphasis in that bill and call for projects for tribes and rural areas. Half of that money will be spent in rural areas. So there's always a concern that we're not supporting, or these infrastructure dollars don't go to rural areas, but there's a real concerted and intentional way of doing that. Active modes, there's a lot of opportunities for bikes and pedestrians, transit, and then a lot of research dollars for alternative modes. There's substantial dollars for safety. Is that right, Jonathan?
Yeah, safety is a big thing in this because one of the things that has been developed through federal highway is a safe system approach, is kind of the way, basically there's a bunch of different caveats to it, but one of the biggest things is identifying kind of the fact that humans make mistakes, and the system has to account for that, and basically that, there is such a thing as a vulnerable user. Cyclists and pedestrians are vulnerable users, and there's not necessarily, there's money in the bill, but there's also language in the bill that now holds agencies accountable for, and states accountable for making sure that they're considering vulnerable users in the designs that they do for these highways and bridges. That's a big thing that's new really to this bill. I mean, there's always been kind of an emphasis on, cyclists and pedestrians, but the number of cyclist and pedestrian deaths have kept rising. So it's time for, a little bit more action, a little bit more carrots and sticks, as Jeannie likes to use the term. But we're going to see a lot more for vulnerable users as part of this bill when it becomes law.
And as Pete says, these deaths are unacceptable.
Absolutely,
Jonathan?
and that's a theme you'll find all across every single state DOT. If you look at their highway safety plan, it's 0 deaths, 0 serious injuries. That's what they're all looking for. But this is the first federal action that puts money, a lot of money, behind that, and also communities too, because a lot of communities, municipal planning organizations have tried to implement Vision Zero, and they just haven't had the resources to completely do it. Well, now there's a grant program called Safe Streets and Roads for All. It will put money specifically toward those Vision Zero programs through competitive grants.
Jeannie or Jonathan, can you quickly define what is a vulnerable user? What does that mean for those of us not in the?
Sure. A vulnerable user, it's your cyclist, your pedestrian, basically your non-motorized vehicle user that is potentially susceptible to harm or injury for, being exposed to the traffic that's out there.
These are very high risk. They're very high risk of serious and fatal injuries.
Right.
In traffic. And then there's other things like research, including research into hot zones and finding ways to put in cooler pavements and trees, connected autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of research. We were talking about the transportation stuff. There's a ton of stuff for water and getting rid of combined sewer overflows. That means that there's poop flowing into our natural waterways. We have to find ways to cleaning those up. So what does this look like state by state? I think Representative Kildee did a great job of putting this out right away. 6 Michigan Republicans voted no, but other Michigan Democrats just brought home these kinds of investments. And as I say, it was not very bipartisan. It's about the most bipartisan thing we've seen, but historically. Not in historic context. Infrastructure is, motherhood and apple pie. The other thing I would say is it's really poised to fuel an economic recovery. All those freighters and cargo ships you see that are waiting, all of that pent-up demand, this infrastructure bill will unleash that kind of economic wave. And I think that, as much as the pandemic has hurt our economy, I think there's a lot of opportunity and renaissance in looking forward. Jonathan?
Yeah, I was going to say it was kind of funny, after seeing this kind of back in, and starting to advocate for this stuff back in the late 2000s, just seeing all of a sudden that evening and the next day, really, just my Twitter timeline filling up with politicians talking about infrastructure was just the 2010 version of me would have been very excited to see that back then. So it was amazing to see, just everybody, and, you've heard there's been a little bit of commentary about how are they going to, who's going to campaign on infrastructure? Is that really going to work? People don't really care. Well, you've got every single person who voted for this thing. Even Mitch McConnell himself has said, this funding will be a godsend to Kentucky, and just you've got everybody who voted for this thing and supported this thing out there selling it.
There is no better picture for an elected official than going and opening a school or cutting a ribbon on a bike path or cutting, breaking ground for new, for airports or fixing really dangerous facilities. So that's what we have to look forward to. Louisiana put this out, but every state is looking at what it will mean to them. And Louisiana has real need for resilient transportation system. They have disruptive flooding. So what's in the bill? We talked about what are called apportionments, and that's where the state DOTs, it shores them up for 5 years. Like I said, a lot of these states are breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that we don't have to battle, and even the DOT, the 55,000 employees, are breathing a sigh of relief that we don't have to come back every year. So it means roads and bridges and safety, but it spends new dollars on transit and zero emissions and infrastructure, and it expands broadband and adds dollars for wastewater, drinking water. In my state, we had, the pandemic meant that the resources and revenue that were going to go to extending light rail were curtailed, and our earlier discussions this year were, well, it's not going to be 20x 30, it's going to be 2040. But with these new infusions of investments, those dates can move up. Now, I like to talk about carrots. So, want to talk about discretionary, Jonathan?
Sure. There's a ton of discretionary grants in this bill, historic, really. And the U.S. Department of Transportation has control of about $100 billion in discretionary grants. And this is going to be really the Biden administration's control on how they want things to go. If they want to see, the equity, the resiliency, and that restorative justice, this is where they're going to get it in these discretionary grants. You have, as I mentioned there, I mentioned a couple of them, but you have the Safe Streets and Roads for All. For Vision Zero, that's going to be a big one. You have the Reconnecting Communities pilot program that they're going to have for grants there to potentially, do some planning and some projects, where they will be doing some reconnecting. And if Build Back Better, when Build Back Better passes, there's right now there's $4 billion extra to add to that $1 billion. So it'll be about $5 billion that'll be there to do that work. And then you have Protect grants, which are climate resiliency grants. And those are, there's a ton of stuff there. There's planning, there's the engineering, and those things can apply from, anything from basically improving current infrastructure for resiliency to creating an actual plan on how you're going to do this. There's so much there that basically US DOT has to design the grant program and then come up with how they're going to track it. And they have to, and all of these grant programs, they're going to have to report back to Congress on how this is working. Mm-hmm. So, this isn't just going to be money given to the states and them just, doing what they want with it. There's going to be tracking, there's going to be requirements. There's going to be a lot of direction and guidance from US DOT here. So for folks who have been wondering kind of what, Secretary Pete's going to be doing and how he's going to influence things, this is it. The discretionary grant program is going to be a big part of, what we see over these next 5 years.
I've been saying the real work's going to start for Pete. You thought he was working hard. He's going to be working really hard. And maybe you won't even see him as much because this is the real kind of work that he likes to do. And it's very, it's intensive. There are cities and towns and state DOTs across the country or state transit agencies across the country that are saying, oh, if I only had this much money, we could put in, better lighted, better safety, better, more accessible, fixing every bus and transit stop so that it's ADA accessible. I've always wanted to do that. Now's the time. These grants are written in such a way that if you are doing all those good things, all the, plus things, you will be rewarded with money. And if you can, especially if you can show, we did a study and it shows that X% will there be X% more accessibility, or we will be reaching 40% more disadvantaged communities. We will be connecting them with, access to opportunities. You will be this is the incubator, and all those good ideas. Next year, the discretionary program, someone's going to say, I loved what they did, and I'm going to copy it. So that's how these good things kind of happen.
And I believe they have about 18 months to get those grant programs up and running from the time that the bill is actually passed.
Yeah, and I think they'll try to beat that. And then if you want to know more about where those ASCE bad grades are, you can look on their site there, the infrastructure report card, and you can find out what's broken in your state, schools, broadband, all those things. And it goes state by state. But the White House has put out summaries state by state of where they expect what the impact will be of the infrastructure bill. So we might drop those in the chat, or you can find them again. But just in my state, it means 8.6 billion, game changer for Washington State. And as I said, that's the light rail extension that maybe gets to be advanced. So how can you guys stay engaged? Really talk it up. We really want to say, in my state, this means a lot. It's a game changer. Remember how your reps voted. I don't expect to see those no votes at a groundbreaking or a ribbon cutting on something they voted against. But you never know. And then learn about those projects in your area. And we're going to, Laura and Bill, we were talking about how we might do some, advocacy training. But more thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think we're going to get into the public process here on the next slide. Okay. But really the public process, there's Rhonda again. The public process really is the opportunity for folks to weigh in on this. And that's at the planning stage, and that's also at the design stage. And there are different, some states will have long range plans that you can weigh in on. And then in the design process, you have kind of the project basically that you can weigh in on. And there's some things there, having gone through and been part of many public hearings, there are ways to approach it that can be very constructive and helpful in kind of moving things in the direction, at least, providing valuable input to the people who are there, the agencies that are there, to get the most out of that and that process, and make sure they at least know what that particular issue is. So that's sort of the training that we would potentially offer.
Yeah, there's opportunities to volunteer. Find out if your state has a transportation or traffic safety commission, and find a way to volunteer there. Pay attention to those meetings. In the long range plan, that's where they say where those bike lanes are going to go, or where the transit is going to happen, or where we're going to put new ped paths or what have you. This is in this long range plan. That's where they do the dreaming. So make sure that those mission, vision, and values reflect your values for equity, inclusion, sustainability, safety. And then as you get to the planning of the project, they will ask your opinion. They have to through environmental process. And they will also ask your opinion about impacts and mitigation before they issue permits. There. Time for questions.
All right, thank you, Jeannie and Jonathan. Let's do a little jazz hands for Jeannie and Jonathan. Let's do this, okay? And Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing so I can see everybody's faces. That would be awesome. All right, awesome, great job. And we're gonna take some questions now. If you have a question, if you could put it up in the chat. Bill, I think we've been pretty good about asking as we went along. We have been asked by Christina to share the slides, so we'll be able to get those out to folks as well. A few things I want to draw your attention to is I do have one question, is that Jonathan and Jeannie have talked in the past. If you watched any of our previous Bill, the era events, about taking a first step, that, this is the type of bill, now that it's going to become law, that it will allow for us to take some first steps. And the first steps are super important. And those first steps actually create momentum. And I would like to hear from Jeannie and Jonathan separately what you're looking forward to as a first step. So what is from your expertise, from the things that you care about, what is your favorite first step? So I'll start with Jonathan and then go to Jeannie.
I would say, just on the safety side, just the recognition of Vision Zero, the ability, and putting the money behind it, putting, the language in there. I was, as the folks that know me, and I've said this, I was really excited to see kind of roundabouts kind of codified in federal law, that they were actually, safe for all users. And that's kind of a huge, it's a minor clause in a giant bill, but it's got such a potential for a huge impact across the country, because you now have Congress saying that this particular treatment, is safe for all users. It is indeed, what people have been saying it is, and just having that backing will be huge moving forward. But as far as the kind of the first steps, I really think these discretionary grant programs are going to be big. And especially the Reconnecting Communities program. I've seen a lot about people saying that there's not enough effort, there's not enough money behind it, but people really don't realize that, you have 19 GOP votes and to get this through. They couldn't have put this into reconciliation most likely and had it survive. They had to go through the Senate, get the votes, and get this thing passed. So while it may not have a lot of funding initially, getting the program was the biggest thing. And getting these progressive, quote, progressive programs through a GOP Senate, with those votes was just such, a huge milestone. And now these programs can get even more funding moving forward.
Jeannie.
And I'll say, I just had this conversation with Mary Rarick. She interviewed me for You Can't Beat Blue, which is really sweet. So that'll be coming up. But one of the things I found in my transportation circle is when Pete was running, so many of my transportation friends in the industry, if they had to pick a candidate, and these were Republicans, Democrats, if they were picking a candidate, it was that guy that's running transportation right now. He was, very well liked, and all of these people have been waiting pent up for the last 4 years for something to happen. And the Obama administration had made some great strides on sustainability, and then it just died. Nothing happened. It, it just died on the vine. So I am thrilled to see these creative juices, this, love and interest from this, not just this administration, but the people on the ground who work this every day. They're going to see, a sea change and an ability to move with rocket speed on some of these projects and moving sustainability and climate change. I mean, we've been waiting, and someone like Pete is going to help us to define what those metrics are and help move all of that along. It's not all defined right now. There's a program called J40, Justice 40, and the administration is saying that they want to focus 40% of all of these investments in disadvantaged areas. So you'll hear more and more about that. The problem is they're not exactly sure what that means or how you measure it, or there's a ton of different ways to look at it. We have a lot of information, but like Jonathan said, how do you know when you've reconnected that community? Or what do you say to Native tribes that have been, displaced from their lands for hundreds of years? So what does that restorative justice start to look like? but I think we're gonna start to learn, and I'm thrilled about that.
This has been great because I think one of the things we all have to keep in mind is we're not very patient. We're not. We're not patient as humans. And as Americans, we are really impatient. Today, I was in went to an appointment, and there's a Starbucks around the corner. And Starbucks is no longer taking call ahead ordering. And I heard people out on the street complaining. You mean I have to wait in line for my coffee? That, by the way, you're not making? Yeah, you do. You have to wait in line. I have a theory that part of the reason that we're in somewhat the pickle we're in right now is we love an antidote. We love to take a pill and it solves everything. We don't want to put in the work to actually get to the root of the problem. Bill Diera is dealing with things that have literally been dying for decades. Whether it be our roads, our bridges, our safety on the roads and bridges. We have people in our country who don't have clean water to drink. We have communities in our country who don't have paved roads to get there. So as we're all wondering, when's the first ribbon cutting? Pump your damn brakes, people. Because now is when the work starts. And Dr. DeVoe, because I'm going to use my credential, okay? Dr. DeVoe is going to need everybody to become scholars of their state. Mary Rarick was very kind. She put up the White House has put together this great website. I will say the White House does a very good job. They do this with everything. They do these great websites that give you all the nitty gritty. I wish people would use them, but they're there. I just took that document and I have put together an email to my state rep and to my mayor and to my city councilor, because one of the things in Massachusetts, it says there's X amount of money for mass transit. We have 3 commuter rail stops in my city that were just on the front page of the paper that have no ADA accessibility. 0, nothing, nada, zip. If you have ambulatory needs, you cannot get on the commuter rail in my city. Nah. So what do? Make sure you always know where your White House fact sheet is. Make sure you're watching the news. And how can you engage? As a call to action, and Julie or Bill, I'm going to ask you to put the sign up information up in the chat. Right now, we have a Google form. And I want you to click on it once it goes up into the chat. And tonight, I want you to fill it out. I want you to fill it out. I want you to look at it and I want you to think, what's happening? What's happening in my state or in my locality? I know that Jeannie put up in the slide that great tweet from the Michigan congressman about who supported stuff. I know there's been some other folks who have put out some great social media content. Share it with us because we want to keep track of that. I know Jean Shaheen up in New Hampshire did a great one. I know there's some other folks who are doing some great things where they're literally standing on the, side of the Merrimack River and saying, this is gonna be great. Okay, so we need to make sure that we are keeping track of that, but we want to know what's happening in your area. And we also need someone in every state to be a point person. I don't need you showing up at every damn ribbon cutting. I don't need you to be like, all right, I'm in Texas. It's going to take me 18 hours to drive from, this spot to this spot, but I got gas in the car. Let's go. I don't need you to do that. They do need you to pay attention because we want to have someone in every state who is a point person. And ultimately, as we build a grassroots movement around something that may sound extraordinarily wonky and dorky and nerdy, okay, this is about quality of life. This is about our quality of life. People vote about quality of life. Bye, Mary. Thanks for being here. Women especially vote for quality of life. If we want to know what suburban housewives are doing, they're voting for quality of life. So we need to promote that. I was looking back on everything that Build the Era has accomplished in terms of events since the very beginning. I don't even want to mention how many happy hours we've had about the infrastructure bill, but there's been a lot of them. But besides that, we have had toolbox trainings on relational organizing, one on state priorities, one on financing. Okay. We want you to understand, we want you to be educated in all of this, and they're all up there on our YouTube channel. We have had information about excuse me, about safety. We are having an event next week on Tuesday about EV adoption, so electric vehicle adoption, with a gentleman by the name of Lauren McDonald. Lauren is literally the EV master. He just came from a conference where he spoke to 2,000 people. Like, he has the biggest EV newsletter out there. So if you have questions about EV adoption, and that includes hybrids, make sure you come to that. But also, if you're talking to your friends and they have questions about EV adoption, get them the link to the event. Okay. And if you go to buildtheera.com, it's right there in our calendar. You can click on it and send it to people. My last point here is that Bill alluded to this at the very beginning when we were just kind of getting ourselves acclimated to the room and before we turned on the video. We cannot expect anyone to message about this except us. Period. If you turn on the evening news, everybody's head's on fire. It's doom and gloom. Today was a great day. Today was a great day. I got to hear Pete talk on a panel, and it was like my soul was filled with happiness. But not only that, he's actually speaking at the global level on shit that we have heard him talking about since day one. And now there's French people going, wee, look at this guy, he's really good. And then you've got people in Sweden going, whatever people from Sweden say. There's people all over the place saying this guy is awesome. And we're like, no shit, we told you he was awesome. But this isn't a campaign. This goes on for a long time. So pace yourselves, but keep doing the work. And thank you for being here.
I wanted to add that
always being our voice and our leader here. You were sincerely appreciated. I dropped into the chat here some graphics, and it's only one state. It's Pennsylvania. We just started that one, but we will have these out for you. We will share them in an organized way so that all key states have these available. And it's, again, it's the highlighting what it's going to mean for your state. This is what it's going to bring home for your state. And the last slide, where we thank the representatives who voted for this. And that is a key part of this as well, is take the time to thank your representatives who voted for this historic chapter in American history, and let everyone know that they supported this.
I wrote a very nice email to Pramila Jayapal, and for those of you that know me, that was good. And I heard her on the radio yesterday talking about all the good things in the infrastructure bill, and her hope that we would, you know, her confidence that we would pass Build Back Better. So.
Jonathan, any last words for us?
I think it's, you know, that's, Laura summed it up, you know, really well. You know, we just need to keep doing the work. You know, it's been we're coming up here on our first year, basically, at the end of our first year. And it's been, you know, really great to see kind of the evolution of things. And now we finally have, you know, an infrastructure bill that we can go out and, you know, do something with it and, you know, make some positive change in our country. So I'm looking forward to the work.
Great. If you take nothing else away besides the information that you learned today, please know that the work has really just begun for us. We now need to sell and tell. We need to sell this plan to the American voters and tell them why it's going to make their life better. And that's what's on us, and all of us here at Build the Era will do everything we can to help you sell it and to tell it. Thank you, folks. Have a great evening.